This is the Ask a Pro-Life Apologetics stream, or Ask a Pro-Life Apologist stream. My name is Matthew Mittelberg, and I'm joined here by Mike Sherrard, Megan Almon, and Scott Klusendorf. And we are so excited to have you join us tonight, whether you are on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, Twitter. We are streaming everywhere tonight, which is great. And we are excited to hear your questions and your concerns about the pro-life position, because that's what we're here to do, is to address your deepest questions and your deepest concerns about this topic. And the way that you can ask those questions is just by putting it in the chat. All the chats come together in our Restream account here so that we can see your questions. And so as we go throughout the night, just put your questions in there. I'll do my best to moderate, to sort through those questions and bring them to our panel here. And we want to just say this is a serious topic. It's a serious question, and we know that you have real topics that you want to discuss, and we want to address those. So please put those in the chat. Mike is our president of Apologetics Inc., and he has spoken on this topic as well. He most recently just spoke at a church this past weekend on this topic. Megan has worked with Scott at Life Training Institute for many years, and is an expert in pro-life apologetics. And then Scott is really the greatest of all time. He's the GOAT when it comes to apologetics. He is the man that has influenced this debate and this question probably more than anyone else. And he is the author of The Case for Life, which I read many years ago, and it greatly influenced me. And he has a second edition now that has just been released by Crossway. It's an excellent resource for anyone who is curious for a comprehensive treatment of the pro-life position. So
yeah, hey, do you have that first edition next anywhere by you?
I don't, but it's it's
half the size.
Yeah, it's much smaller. So
that's a meaty second edition.
This is the revised and expanded account of pro-life apologetics, The Case for Life. So, and I'll just say too, Scott, you influenced me in huge ways when I was a student at Summit Ministries. When I was 17, I went and attended, and you couldn't make it in person, but we watched a video of you doing your pro-life apologetics, and it was the first time I had heard anything on this subject before, but we had a 4-credit class that we could take as a part of that. And I wrote my topic on pro-life apologetics, and then I did a speech out of that, and it ended up winning the speech of the year for that speech and debate league. And I just remember talking, thank you. Well, I remember talking to you, and you gave me some gracious feedback, and you spent time with a 17-year-old just answering his questions. And so, and now I'm doing apologetics full time, thanks to you. So thank you for.
Well, the Lord is using you very well, Matthew.
Thank you so much.
How many stories do you think there are out there of people that have succeeded just by ripping off your material, Scott?
I don't know. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of giants too. I ask myself all the time, how many people have been won to the pro-life side because J.P. Moreland, Greg Kokel, Paul Cox, and others invested in me?
Of course I say that tongue in cheek, because if anybody's guilty, I'm guilty of it.
Well, I take it as a badge of honor if people rip me off in their presentations. It's not a rip off. It's called sharing.
There you go.
That's great. I rip you off, but I give you credit. So I think, at least I constantly refer to you as the GOAT of pro-life apologetics. So
not the grandpa of apologetics. I thought that was what you were going to rock with.
No, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. That's,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not quite ready for grandpa status.
No,
not me.
I guess in a sense you have spiritual grandchildren, because now the three of us have influenced others based on that material you taught us. And so it's there. You have all in that sense. It's multi-generational.
I'll accept that. That's okay. A gracious award I'm happy to hear about. Yeah, you're right. And you guys are doing phenomenal work reaching people. And it's a good relief to know that when that time comes, that I need to get behind an editor when I'm 83 and telling too many stories from my youth instead of delivering content, that there are many able-bodied people to step up and make this work as needed.
I like Anelia's comment here. I always call Scott the OG of pro-life apologetics. That is
wonderful.
Great reference. The original gangster of pro-life
Oh,
apologetics.
okay. I thought it was old guy.
No. The fact that you say that makes you an old guy, but no, it
No
is
free books for you, Matt.
Thank God.
Bless it.
Tragic. Well, Mike, you wanted to share something about Scott tonight too, so I'll hand
Yeah,
it
well,
over
you
to
know, all this talk about Scott and his influence, it almost sounds like he's ready to go out to the pasture. But Scott, you're at the top of your game, man. You sure are. And I'm really excited that we're going to be working together in a more, official capacity. So as of this month, the Life Training Institute and Apologetics Inc. are entering into a formal affiliation where we're going to be working together in a lot of strategic ways to get the pro-life message out to as many people as we can. Our team of speakers many of them are already equipped, as we've been talking about, to make the case for life. But through this affiliation, the rest of our team can become really well versed in pro-life apologetics. And I like the strategic aim here, where when our team is going out, getting a number of events and wherever, we can also strategically look to add on to these events private schools, Christian schools, Catholic schools, to bring a compelling case for life to these schools, really at no extra cost and not at a lot of extra work for us. So I think that the strategy of our two ministries coming together to work in a meaningful way is going to do a lot of good. I know we're going to benefit from it. And I think our partnership with you helps advance that LTI mission. So more details on this will be coming out and unfolding later. We'll do, a formal public announcement and all that kind of jazz, but really excited to get to work with you in a more, official capacity or formal capacity. It's not a legal joining of anything like that yet, just an affiliation, but it's going to be a meaningful partnership that I can't wait to really get going on, man.
Well, brother, the feeling is mutual from the LTI side. We think we're better together, not to use a Biden administration cliche, but we're going to build back better. No.
Let's just make everybody angry before we get going on a controversial topic.
Really, I can't wait to see the questions. But no, this is going to be good for us. Everybody at Apologetics Inc. is already an established apologist, but not only that, all of your speakers know how to deliver a pro-life apologetics presentation. And you just landed, I think, one of the top speakers in the world in Megan, who is really, she's at the top of her game every bit as much as I'm wherever I am. And I'll tell you what, there isn't anybody I would say that I would trust more on the issue than Megan. So she's my top choice on this. So I'm glad to see her working with you. And in a sense, it's nice because I still feel like she's close to home. And, it's not, there were many organizations that wanted to snag Megan, and I'm glad she landed with you. This is a great affiliation. And in a sense, she's just going out a little further ahead of us, and we're tagging along too.
Well, this whole partnership makes sense to me. I feel a little bit like a bridge, but what I love about it is that because the pro-life message is so centered on what it means to be human and what it means to be valuable, and because those are the questions culturally that are being asked more than any other, I feel like this is the cornerstone issue. And I'm not the first to say that. I think Francis Schaeffer said that years and years ago. But if this one goes, the culture will crumble with it. So getting to kind of use pro-life apologetics as something central, but also as a springboard to all of these other important questions that are being asked. It's for me, it's the lens through which I see how to do Christian apologetics. And Scott, that is thanks to you, my friend. So you've just, it's been 15 years of pouring into me, and that's not going to stop. I'm still going to bug you, because I know that's what you tell people is I bugged you till you hired me, because that's what they ask. That's not going to stop. So, yeah,
great.
I was.
Well, we are very excited about this, and what we want to do now is just turn to your questions. So if you want to put those in the chat, we would love to hear from you. And I just wanted to kick it off by asking Scott you a question, because I've been watching some of your interviews recently about the topic of what is the focus of pro-life apologetics, because many times I've heard people say you claim to be pro-life, but really you're just pro-birth. And if you were truly pro-life, you would be, for prison reform, and you would be for, all of these other things. And yet I've watched you on some debates where you want to insist, no, pro-life is about, it's about the womb. It's about helping babies to be born into this world. So can you just speak a little bit to that question and to that topic? Why are we limiting ourselves in that discussion just to that?
Well, let me start by just stating what the essential pro-life argument is, and then we'll talk about why people want to distract from that. Our essential argument can be put formally as a syllogism. In fact, I love to tell pro-life advocates the three most important words in pro-life apologetics are syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. And the reason is, when you bring up the topic of abortion, as Megan and Mike can tell you, people love to change the topic on you. They want to talk about trusting women, choice in who decides, privacy. What about economic hardship and a billion other bunny trails they want to take you down instead of answering your formal argument? So it's important we state our case formally so that we can have clarity in the discussion. And our argument, simply put, goes like this. Premise one, it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise two, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore, abortion is wrong. Now, Matt, that argument may be mistaken. We could be wrong about this. But in order to refute it, you got to do one of three things. You've got to show that, one, the terms are unclear, or two, the argument isn't valid. The conclusion doesn't follow logically. Or you can show the argument is unsound, meaning one or more of the premises is false. Outside of that, the argument stands and you're obliged to work with it. It doesn't work to say, well, you're not doing enough on these other issues. Let's say pro-lifers were doing nothing for humans once they're born. We're that callous. Now, it's not true, but let's say it were. How would that change whether our argument is valid or sound or clear? And the answer is it wouldn't. Our syllogism, our argument could still stand even if pro-lifers don't live up to what they espouse. And one of the key things pro-lifers need to zero in on, as Christopher Kaiser is very good at pointing out, arguments stand or fall on their merits, not the person making them. Now, it's not true, of course, but suppose I were actually an abortion doctor, but one day a week I pose as a pro-life apologist just because I love the irony of it. And so this is my day and I'm on your show. Could my pro-life arguments uttered from the mouth of a pro-abortion doctor still be good? And the answer is yes, if they pass the soundness, validity, and equivocation tests. You got to judge the argument on its merits. And we don't just state that argument, we defend it. We defend it from science, arguing the unborn are distinct, living and whole human beings from fertilization. That's what embryology textbooks convey worldwide. And we argue philosophically, there's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the young adult or adult, that would justify killing you back then. There are differences, but that's really the wrong question. The question is, do the differences matter such that we can say we could kill you then, but not now? And of course, we argue the differences don't matter. You're not more valuable simply because you're bigger or more developed or less dependent. Those things don't tell us about your value, and they don't tell us why it's a good justification to kill you because of those differences. And that's what our critics got to do. They got to do more than just point out the differences. You got to show why that difference matters and why it's value giving in the first place. And that's what we've got to press people to do. So when people say, well, you don't care about all these other issues, you're not really pro-life, my first response is to want to snarkily say, though I don't, I want to say, so how does that refute my argument I just made? Because the argument stands or falls apart from me. But secondly, this is just preposterous. Think about this for a moment. How does it follow, Matt, that because you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being, you have to fix everything wrong with society? I mean, as we like to point out at LTI, imagine saying to the American Cancer Society, You have no right to call yourself a medical organization when you're only treating one disease and not all of them. After all, what are you doing about lupus? What are you doing about heart disease? What are you doing about Crohn's disease and diabetes? You're not doing anything for those. So you really aren't a healthcare organization. Anybody that said that about the American Cancer Society would be laughed off the pages of peer-reviewed journals. But if you say it about pro-lifers, you're a hero somehow. I think there is, though, Matt, and I apologize for the long answer here, but
hey, we're here to listen, bro.
Well,
we are here to listen.
Because I'm yakking it up. There is a distinction to be made. I think all of us here are very much interested in a lot of issues. For example, we all care about human trafficking. We all care about the poor. We all want to see a fair way to treat refugees and immigrants. We're all on board with that. Our Christian ethic, in other words, can be very broad, but it doesn't follow from the fact that our Christian ethic is broad that the operational objectives of the pro-life movement must be broad and inclusive as well. Frederick the Great put it real well. He who fights everywhere fights nowhere. If pro-lifers took their already thin budgets and spread them even thinner, fighting all these other issues, we'd be broke 5 minutes from now, and that'd be the end of it, which is what I think secretly our critics would like to see happen, and why they work so hard to push this idea that if we're pro-life, we have to take on every issue. Nobody says that about sex trafficking ministries. Nobody says it about poverty issue ministries, but they do say it to pro-lifers. And quite frankly, it's unfair.
Yeah, it's a clever tactic give the devil its due, if you will. Because part of it is it's a shaming tactic.
Yeah.
Making you feel like there's something wrong with you for pursuing this good. And what's really tragic to me, though, is it's not just the pro-choice crowd that's using that tactic. It's the pro-life crowd that's now also championing the whole, you're not pro-life unless you're whole life. And it's a really harmful tactic. It works against the cause. And it's also, it's one of these things where if the pro-life issue deals with all issues affecting humanity, what does the term even mean anymore? What isn't an issue of that affects human beings? So, historically, the movement to end abortion is called pro-life, and there's nothing wrong with people dedicating a significant portion of their time, energy, and resources to just end that one injustice, while they're concerned with the others and perhaps contribute to some degree, or maybe not. And that is okay to dedicate a meaningful portion of your life to addressing one injustice and not feeling like you have to take on every single thing that's
there are some well-intentioned people on our side of the issue. And I say well-intentioned because they have good motives. They really do. And they're people with big hearts. And they say, we're not going to win the public over unless we show them we're willing to take on all these other issues. We've got to show that we have compassion for all of humanity. They mean well by this, but here's the mistake they're making. They are giving their critics too much credit. I have asked people who say to me, well, you're not pro-life, you're not taking on all these other issues. And I'll say to them, if I did take on all those other issues, will you join me in opposing abortion? 100% of the time, and I do mean 100% of the time, the answer is no. Women have a fundamental right to an abortion, meaning they have a right to an abortion for any reason they want through all 9 months of pregnancy, no questions asked. All right, why don't you defend that position instead of trying to smokescreen me? And that's what's really going on here. A lot of our people have mistakenly bought the premises of our critic when they should be pushing back on them.
Yeah,
that's really well said. Go ahead.
Just spoken to several young people who at this point will come up after a presentation and they'll say, I agree with everything that you just said, but I don't want to call myself pro-life because I'm afraid of what others will perceive about me. So there's several sides to this, but one is diffusing the term. One is taking the term and making it out to put someone into a box as if you know everything they think about every other issue. And one of my favorite things about what you've trained all of us to do at some level, Scott, is the ability to go into a place, make a presentation, such that people have to begin asking, well, wait, what do you think about this? Because they've heard a fair and balanced and reasoned case for something, where we've even taken our worst critics, taken pro-choice scholars, and given their material a fair treatment. Like you said, we're not after trying to reshape or do away with what they have claimed, but rather take them at their word and engage with the merits of the argument itself. I think that's impressive to people.
Yes, that's a very good point, Megan. I'm glad you brought this up. There is a tendency among some pro-lifers to systematically dismiss anybody who favors abortion as just being satanically influenced and loving killing babies. And that is not true. We need to know how to engage their arguments, at least know what the arguments are they're putting forward. And that's one of the things I tried to do in the second edition of the book, is survey the major thinkers on the other side. We don't take a ridiculously deep dive into what they argue at every point, but we do outline the broad contours of their arguments and then give you some reasoned responses that you can convey. But that's important to do. We need to understand there can be thoughtful people who we, of course, believe are wrong on the issue, but that does not make them demonically ignorant.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, I think that a lot of the people who are making this kind of argument they're not just looking for debate tactic to say, hey, you guys got to support all of this, or otherwise you're not really pro-life. I think a lot of them are looking at the difficulty of the situation that young mothers are put in various instances, and how hard it would be for them to carry those pregnancies to term. And they feel compassion for them. They feel that it's a very difficult situation to take that baby and let it be born. And so their heart goes out for them, and they haven't thought through the consequences of, yes, but you're saying, you should kill this baby. And I think that's where the SLED acronym helps to, as you say, trot out the toddler and say, hey, there's really nothing different than this unborn baby than one that has already been born. And if we can't kill the toddler for those reasons, we can't kill the unborn baby for those reasons. And when you actually get out of the internet, Twitter sphere and all of that, and you actually talk to a real life pro-life apologist or somebody working in the pro-life realm, we care a lot about young mothers. In fact, there are so many pro-life organizations that are dedicated to helping young mothers, to helping people in vulnerable situations. What are they called? The crisis pregnancy centers, and all of those that are dedicated to helping young mothers. Can you just speak to that a little bit? The care that pro-lifers have for women in vulnerable situations.
There's an excellent article I would commend to everybody's reading called "The Lazy Slander of the Pro-Life Cause," written by a Harvard attorney, Helena Vare. And what she argues is that you look at this nationwide, pro-life pregnancy centers outnumber abortion clinics in some places 3-1 and nationally 2-1. And these centers are not benefiting from federal tax money. They are getting this done through private donations from conservative, often church-going people who give sacrificially to help these women, not only before they give birth, but also after. That's a pretty good piece of work that we're doing out there that we don't get credit for. But one of the things I think we need to do before we make that point is to remind people that the argument for our pro-life cause stands or falls on its merit. And I don't even go into what we're doing. I don't even address their premise until I establish that their argument is really quite phony to begin with. And I want to make sure they understand what the main thing is. The issue here is, does abortion intentionally kill an innocent human being? That's the question we need to talk about. And these other things are distractions, quite frankly.
Yeah. It reminds me of some of the conversations I think that were being had around the emancipation movement. And there were real concerns about how these things were going to happen logistically, and what's going to happen to these businesses and people whose careers and families are dependent on these things, and what's going to happen to slaves, and how are they going to provide for themselves. And it's like, okay, yes, all interesting questions. Is slavery wrong? Yeah,
Yeah.
slavery is wrong. It's got to end, and we'll figure out the rest of that later. And we do need to figure out those questions.
Well, there
I
are
mean,
even evangelicals out there, influencers and so-called thought leaders that are saying that though they personally oppose abortion, they don't want to make it illegal because it would be too expensive to do so. And forgive me, I'm an English major, so I cite my sources. One of them is Eugene Show, for example, and there are others who have said they don't want to make abortion illegal because the cost of legal enforcement is too great. But imagine this, Matt. Imagine saying to a minority suffering discrimination, we will protect you as long as it's not too expensive. We'll do what we can to validate your existence as a human being, but only if it doesn't cost us too much. No, people deserve equality under the law because of their human nature, not because or only if we can fit them into our budget scheme.
amen.
And that carries across not just for the pro-life view. The pro-life view that Scott's talking about is one that speaks to every single other injustice that we listed earlier that we rightly care about as Christians and that our critics rightly care about as individuals, as people living in this world. Is that we are equal based on our human nature and nothing else. We can't be functional. I saw that we had a question about what is SLED, Scott. So I think
Go ahead, Megan. Take it away.
All right. SLED is an acronym. It's a tool that is used when someone, not when they're questioning the science of the pro-life argument per se, the whether or not the embryo is human. That's a scientific question, and there is a way to address that. But if they admit that the embryo is human, according to what science says, but in some way is not as valuable as you and I are as born humans, there's a question of value there that comes from philosophy. So SLED is a tool that helps us address those types of objections. It was originally coined by Stephen Schwartz, the philosopher, and Scott did modify it. And it's just incredibly useful. If you can remember these 4 things, you can remember how to use this tool. Stephen Schwartz had said back then that the only differences you can point out between embryos and us fall into these 4 categories. The S stands for size, the L for level of development, the E for environment, that deals with location, and the D is degree of dependency. And so if you look at just one of those, if somebody's making the claim that the embryo is tiny, like it's smaller than the dot at the end of a sentence, therefore it is insignificant, not valuable like you and me. Well, if we look at size, we ask the question, is size the thing that grants us value? If that's what grants us value as human beings, we run into a real problem because we're all different sizes. Everyone viewing tonight, everyone listening in is different sizes. And so we've created a value spectrum on which those who are smaller matter less than those who are larger. So if we're going to discount the unborn from valuable humanity based on size, then we're going to discount a whole lot of people. And all we've achieved is gross inequality. That's true of every single other initial in that acronym. It's true of any functional value answer that you can give. And SLED is a tool that helps you be able to see not only is this the value giving trait, and if so, what spectrum has that made? So that's how you use that one.
Yeah, Megan's right on the money here. What tends to happen is pro-life Christians hear a critic say that embryo doesn't count because, for example, it's not yet self-aware. And instead of challenging the premise of self-awareness, typically what happens is the well-intentioned pro-lifer assumes the premise of the critic and says, oh, well, that embryo has brainwaves we can measure by week 6 and can be dreaming in the womb by week 13. Well, wait a minute, that's a bad answer. And here's why. You just bought the premise that self-awareness is what's decisive. He's making the claim, make him defend why it is in the first place. If you're going to argue self-awareness is what gives us value, tell me why it's value giving and not, for example, having a belly button that points out rather than in. Our critics need to make that argument, and often they don't. Very few do, it seems. Even in the scholarly literature, you don't find people like Peter Singer or Michael Tooley or even David Boonin, for that matter, arguing why the traits they have picked out as decisive, which are always cognitive in nature, why those things matter in the first place. There needs to be an argument for that, and it's arbitrary. And you think about it, and Megan touched on this, if these traits are what give us our value and we don't share them equally, you've just lost the foundation for human equality, because all of us on this call tonight are more or less self-aware, more or less able to feel our sensations, more or less able to interact with our environments. And these are traits that can come and go within the course of the lifetime of a single individual. I mean, we literally have an episodic problem where someone starts off being a person because they have a requisite level of, say, self-awareness. They could lose it if they're in a coma and then regain it again if they come back. This is kind of absurd. The biblical view makes a lot more sense. You and I retain our identity through time and change. We have an immaterial essence or soul that grounds our identity through whatever physical changes we go through. And the unborn has that same human nature that we're arguing grounds our identity as you and I do. There will be people who push back and say, well, you and I have a human nature, but not that one-celled embryo. And of course, the question I love to ask is always this: how do two human parents create offspring that isn't human, but later becomes so? Our critics need to give an answer to that. It's not enough to just say, well, you know, this is what we're going to assert. No, I'm not buying assertions. I need some evidence as to why that can even happen.
Hey, that's a great question, Josh. Thanks for asking it. Of course, Scott's book will flesh out the SLED acronym more, but a quick and handy resource, if you want to grab it, is go to Scott's website, the Life Training Institute. The website is prolifetraining.com. And under the resources, find the 5-minute pro-lifer. It really takes the pro-life apologetic position and condenses it into something that's really easy to understand. And it's a good starting place to begin growing in knowledge, but it works through SLED there. And so it's a good resource if after listening to this, even tomorrow or whenever, you want to go check it out.
One small correction, Mike. It's actually not the 5-minute pro-lifer. It's the link that says the case for life. If they just scroll down that page, they'll get a miniature version of the book in essence.
All right. I'm on your site. I'm literally looking at the 5-minute pro-lifer right now.
Boy, I better take a look at my site. Something must have been changed.
There's probably just both of those.
Both of them. Okay, so we're both right.
But if there's anything we know, you should always trust Scott when it comes to tech, right? So, because that's what he's
That's his specialty, his other specialty. Yes.
Yeah.
We've got a great question here from Bible Guy 89, who says, what do you think is the best pro-choice argument, and what is the best response? And I love this question because it's about getting into the nitty-gritty of this debate. Yet at the same time, you know, all of us on the stream are pro-life, and so to some extent we're convinced that there is no truly excellent pro-choice argument. You know, at the end of the day, we do believe that those arguments don't work, and yet, of course, there are some that are going to be better than others. So I don't know who wants to take a first stab at this, but what do you think is the best pro-choice argument and the best response?
Megan, what's your favorite?
My favorite?
Or the one you think is best?
The ones that have teeth to them. I think probably the most sophisticated that I've run into is David Boonan's argument, which is, take a minute to unpack it. But the tricky part of his is that he grants our pro-life premise as a pro-choice scholar. So he would grant the scientific argument that the unborn are indeed human. He would grant that they are valuable. He would even grant that the picture, like as he does at the opening of his book, that an ultrasound photograph of you in the womb is the same as the you that's sitting, you know, there right now. And he would say it's still fine earlier on to have taken your life at that earlier stage of development. And what makes his argument tricky is he kind of takes it out of those realms and plunks it into our rights being grounded in our desires. And so you have to do some sorting through that. And Scott, if you want to unpack that a little more, you can. Ultimately, his argument does not prevail because he ends up borrowing from the pro-life view, the very thing Scott's been talking about with the common human nature that we all share. So in order for him to get his ultimate argument off the ground, he has to go there and take from that. And that's why it's not effective in the long run. But he is a brilliant scholar nonetheless. And not only that, but from what I hear, just a great guy. So but anyway, to this question, I think his is the most sophisticated I've read.
I think I would agree with you, actually. Again, Boonin is going to argue you and I are identical to the embryos we once were. That wasn't a blob of tissue back there. That was us. Now, this differs from guys like Peter Singer and Michael Tooley, who argue on the basis of identity that there was no you there at the embryonic, fetal, and newborn stage. Boonin is going to say, no, you were there, but you don't have the same right to life then as you do now. So Boonin's going to make a rights-based argument, and guys like Singer, Tooley, Jubilini, Minerva are going to make an identity-based argument. It's important to keep that distinction in mind. Again, Singer and Tooley, they're going to say there was no you there. So if you were killed through abortion, there was really no subject of consciousness there, because on their view, what matters is not biological continuity, but mental or cognitive continuity. And until you have cognitive continuity, there's no person there. Boonin says, no, that's a bunch of phooey. You were there, but you don't have the same right to life until you have organized cortical brain function, as Megan correctly pointed out. And he grounds that. He says the reason you've got to have organized cortical brain function is because that's the architecture that's necessary to have immediately exercisable desires, which is where he grounds the right to life. Until you can immediately exercise desires or having desires, you don't have a right to life. And Megan really squarely pointed out what the flaw was with this. I'll add a few other things, but can a slave be conditioned not to desire his freedom? Well, of course. Does that mean he's not entitled to it? Now, as Megan points out, Boonin would say he is entitled to it. But then that raises a question. Wait a minute. If having desires is what's decisive and the slave doesn't have them, what's wrong with enslaving him if he doesn't desire his freedom? And it seems to me Boonin would be forced to say, well, that's not the type of way you should treat a human being. Okay, well, if he's going to respond that way, he's arguing that what's doing the moral work is our nature as a human being, not these traits that may come and go in the course of a single subject. So I agree with Megan. The principal weakness in Boonin's argument is it seems he's got to borrow from our worldview in order to get his own case off the ground if he wants to oppose, for example, slavery being okay if the slave doesn't desire it. Or Beckwith uses another example here. Again, I apologize for the lengthy answers here, but you guys are so brilliant.
You're good.
You're causing my synapses to go nuts here. Frank Beckwith, in his book, Defending Life, gives another good counterexample. He says, suppose an enterprising doctor surgically alters the brain of a developing fetus before it ever has desires, before cortical brain function is present, and that child is then born having no desires and will never have them because his brain's been surgically altered before he had desires. And then at age 5, the child is killed so we can harvest his organs in a fetal farming scheme to treat disease in other human beings, or excuse me, in a human farming scheme to treat disease in other human beings. Was that child wronged? Now, Boonin is going to, in his book, try to say yes, but it seems to me it's a rather clumsy yes, because it seems that he can't really say why that would be wrong unless he wants to say, well, somehow by nature that child was wronged. He was prevented from flourishing as a human being. But the minute you talk about human flourishing, you're borrowing from a view of life that says it's our nature that grounds our value, not our functional abilities that come and go and may not be shared equally by all.
Yeah. And then further, I mean, he has issues with the organized cortical brain activity not being able to pinpoint exactly when that begins. He'll call it somewhere between 26 and 32 weeks. But when it comes to the desires, him making those distinctions between different kinds of desires to try and work out his argument is where we end up with the problem that you presented, the actual versus ideal.
Yeah.
And those ideal desires are where we start going, I think we're borrowing from something else.
Yeah, another guy that is interesting to study on this is Michael Tooley. Again, he's going to disagree with Boonin because while Boonin will say you were there as an embryo, Tooley is going to say you weren't there. There was no subject of consciousness present at the embryonic stage. And what he says is that having rights and interests are what give you value. And a fetus is a potential rational agent, but not an actual rational agent. And Tooley goes on to argue that we have moral obligations to actual rational agents, but not potential ones. And he gives a rather creative thought experiment to prove this. He says, imagine you have a cat and a kitten serum is developed that will turn a kitten into a rational agent if you inject the current with the rationality serum. He then asks this question: are you obligated to give the cat the serum? And he, of course, says, no, you're not. He then argues this. He then makes a symmetry argument. He says, if you weren't required to give the kitten the serum in the first place, what's wrong with interrupting that process once it's begun if you change your mind? So he views abortion and infanticide, killing newborns, as morally justifiable interruptions of the process of turning potential rational agents into actual ones. But I think you can see some real problems with this argument, and feel free to jump in, everybody, as you hear this wild scenario I just threw out there. One of the first things I would point out is, why is it that being a rational person is what gives you the right to life? I would want to push back and make him defend that. But I would also point this out. Why is it that the cat is only a potential rational agent? Well, the answer is because he requires an outside injection to become rational. But that's not true of the human embryo or fetus or even newborn, who by nature already has a rational nature, needing no outside modification to have that nature. It's already there. And it seems to me that Tooley is confusing potential active potential rather with inherent. The fetus has the inherent natural ability to be rational. The kitten does not.
Mm-hmm.
So this question, you might also want to qualify best at what or best for what.
Yeah.
Because here's some really sophisticated arguments that are being engaged that Megan and Scott are talking about. But I think there's another side of best that just means like persuasive and in what setting. There's like a debate setting or for just the general audience. And I think that, because what I hear most often out on the road, if you will, or speaking or in the church are the hard case objections. Like, what about rape and incest?
Yeah.
What about poverty? What about disability? And, the idea behind these objections, right, are you're telling me you're going to force a single mom who already has 5 kids and can't afford any of them. You're going to force her to bring a new child into this world just for that child to suffer and starve. Or they'll talk about some disability. You're going to tell me you're going to force somebody with a severe disability to come into this world and suffer a hardship. Or you're telling me you're going to force a woman who's already suffered a tragic event to relive that tragic event every day of her life. And I think those arguments are best in the sense of persuading the general public, because they hit you at the empathetic level and the compassionate level. And not to maybe jump ahead, because I don't see the chat. Maybe people have asked these questions and we're saving up to answer them. But those questions all assume something about the unborn. And the way that you handle that is by answering those fundamental questions when it comes to abortion. Is, what does it mean to be human? What is the unborn? What makes human life valuable? And that is then how it directs you in answering all of those hard case objections.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Mike. When did you stop cheating on your taxes?
Well, I haven't done mine this year, so I guess I haven't stopped cheating yet. So
wow, that's the most honest answer I've heard from you, bar none.
Why are you assuming that's cheat on my taxes, man? Come on.
Because I'm trying to make a dramatic point here. And I want your audience to think about this. Notice I didn't present a shred of evidence that you cheat on your taxes. I just assumed it. We call this begging the question. You assume the very thing you're trying to prove. And as you were talking and bringing up all these objections, I think Megan and I were going, yeah, we know where the fundamental flaw is right out of the gate here. They all assume the unborn aren't human. And you can see this from popular literature to the President of the United States. The President of the United States, who has the initials Joe Biden, said the following on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade a couple of years ago. He said, reproductive health care, by which he means abortion, reproductive health care is good for, quote, everyone, unquote. All right, wait just a minute, Mr. President. All due respect to your office, does everyone include the unborn? Is it good for them to be systematically dismembered? Is healthcare of that nature good for them? He just assumed they weren't human. And this is where we use the tactic that Matt mentioned a few moments ago, trot out the toddler. We don't use trot out the toddler to argue the unborn are human like the toddler. We use the science of embryology to do that. But we do use it to show that the question, what is the unborn, has to be answered before we can answer the question, can we kill the unborn? So let's say we had a 2-year-old in front of us and his mother couldn't afford to feed him. She's already got 5 other kids. Would it be okay to eliminate her poverty by eliminating the 2-year-old? And of course, everybody's going to say no. And of course, our answer should be, why not? Well, because that's a human being. Well, if the unborn are human like that toddler, should they be intentionally killed in the name of economic hardship any more than we kill a toddler for that reason? Now, we've not yet argued the unborn are human, but at least we've framed the debate around the issue that matters. It's not poverty. It's not medical hardship. It's not she has 10 kids already. It's one question, what is the unborn? We've got to stick to, like glue to that question.
Very well put.
So real quick before moving on, I think that right there should give a lot of hope to people listening to this, because yeah, there are some people out there, the Kate Greasleys, the Toolies, the Boonans, that are making some really sophisticated arguments that need to be dealt with. And it's fantastic that there are people like Scott and Megan that have dedicated such a meaningful portion of their life to answering those questions. Chances are you're not going to find that person. Oh, look at my camera's doing the thumbs up thing, Matthew. I thought I turned that off.
I thought you did too, but
now my computer's probably going to freeze
Mike
on me.
needs affirmation that what he's saying.
So I give it to myself. Look at that.
Yeah.
Is it going to do it again? Oh my gosh. It's so stupid. I bet one of my kids turned that back on. Now
what were you saying about me not being technologically
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'm going to eat my words big time here.
I'm going to give myself a thumbs up for that.
So I think there's some hope in this, some encouragement to those listening that desire to make an impact here is, you're probably not going to meet the person that's read these Boone and Tooley Greasley. You're not going to engage them. You're going to meet the people that have at this empathetic level, or like, I just can't bring myself to force a woman to have a child under these conditions. And those are easier to engage because of what you had just said, where you can say, I understand why you're concerned about this, but we have to answer the question, what is the unborn and what makes human life valuable? We're assuming something about them that we can't do. So it's not that you're off base in having concern for the condition that the woman is in, but that is not the fundamental issue in the abortion debate. And that is something all people listening to can become equipped to engage rather quickly, and thus find themselves with the ability to have a lot of productive and respectful conversations on the issue of abortion.
A lot of these objections lose their force when they're stated explicitly as a justification for intentionally killing an innocent human being. Megan, how would you approach someone who brings up rape?
Well, I'm going to think through scenarios, right? It depends on where I am, who the person is, what the audience is. So there are different factors there. The first thing I think I want to do, just to tie the knot here from what Mike was saying, is to recognize that being pro-life doesn't mean that we don't feel the thrust of these emotional arguments. In fact, we know that this is hard. We're in it too. We have friends who have been touched by it, family members, even those we work with closely. So when it comes to the rape objection, I think the first thing to note about it internally, as I'm thinking through what would my mental state be, is to recognize this is a difficult thing. So the first thing I want to do is acknowledge that with the person I'm talking to. I might want to know why they're asking the question. So depending on the environment, I can draw that out. But I do have an answer, and I would answer it fairly. And depending on where I am, it'd go many different ways. The basic answer is that though rape is a psychologically much more difficult question than some of the others that we're looking at, categorically, it still comes back to that toddler that you were talking about, Scott. When you trot out the toddler, and we're assuming for the person who's giving the objection and going, rape is something that if that comes up, then I think abortion is fine in that instance. Well, they're assuming that the unborn are not human like you and I, or like the toddler is human. If I had a 2-year-old standing next to me who had been conceived when his mother was raped, every day, let's say he reminds her of it, right? That's emotionally hard for her day in and day out. Can she kill her toddler to lessen that hardship in any way? And the person you're talking to would, if they're thoughtful and being fair, would say, no, she can't.
Yeah.
We're in the same boat. Why not? Well, the toddler's obviously human. The toddler's already a person. That's completely different. Whatever they say, we're back to where we want to be. Is the unborn human like that toddler? And we come from a position of great strength when it comes to that answer. We know that the unborn is unquestionably living, distinct, and wholly human. So that's the first go-to, I think, categorically. There are other ways to look at the rape objection. I think one, Christopher Kaiser does such a wonderful job in his book, The Ethics of Abortion, which I think now is in its 3rd edition. When he talks about this one, rape is one of those things where, because of the evil that is enacted on someone, right? So nobody's saying, oh, this is fair, and here's how it's not fair. Nothing about this situation is okay from the get-go. And Kaiser will recognize that and say, because of the evil done to her, there are things that have been taken from her. I have to sometimes note to my audiences, women aren't the only ones who can be raped, but they are the only ones who can be pregnant if they are raped. And that's rare, but it does happen. Because of what's done to her, normal options are one of the things taken from her. She's left with 2 things. She can have an abortion, which would be the unjust killing of an innocent human being, as our argument would back up. And that's impermissible. And so really she's left with one option. And that is, and depending on the scholar you read, either to do her duty or to be a hero. I would call her a hero. It depends on how they define heroism. But I think that what she does in choosing life for that child flies in the face of what was done to her. It is the ultimate act of defiance.
So what you would be saying, Megan, it's not a supererogatory act that she could decide she doesn't want to fulfill. She has a moral duty to suffer evil rather than inflict it. It's the same idea if the Nazis put a gun to your head and say,
yes,
hey, we're going to shoot you through the head unless you shoot your mother through the skull. You will choose to suffer the evil rather than inflict it. And we wish there were a third option, but there isn't one. And that's the reality that the woman who's been sexually assaulted sadly inherits.
Yeah.
It's psychologically complex, as Megan pointed out, but it's not morally complex. We don't kill 2-year-olds to cease bad memories.
No. So again, like as we started this conversation with, as Mike was saying, no one is denying the hardship of these things, but
Right.
there are real answers that you can thoughtfully give to help someone navigate that, which is actually a much higher view of human beings. We believe that human beings can do what is right, even when it seems impossible.
Yes. That's a great point. You said something else, Megan, on this that I think is really helpful. And that is, your answer will depend on context when these hard cases come up. Sometimes the person raising the question is not what we would call an inquirer who is intellectually honest, just trying to wrestle through her newly found pro-life beliefs. Sometimes the person bringing it up is what we call a crusader who just wants to make you look bad as a pro-lifer. And we are going to deal with him a little differently, aren't we?
Yeah. Yes, we are. Did you want to? I'm thinking of examples in my head, but
well,
because we've been in that
jump
situation.
in, any one of you. I just wanted to frame the issue here.
Yeah, no, so maybe last idea here, Matthew. I don't know if there's some questions.
Yeah, we got some questions coming in, but yeah, go ahead.
But I think just a good tactical kind of comment here is to, as you grow in maturity in defending your beliefs, you're going to recognize that not every situation is the same. and different tactics are appropriate. Different levels of sarcasm or sternness are appropriate. And if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, when you find yourselves in situations when you're getting asked these questions, you better be praying for wisdom and discernment to know what you're up against and when to use a kind word, when to use a strong word, when to be sarcastic, when to even mock. Mocking is an okay approach, but you have to know when and where. And if you follow the example of Jesus, you see how his response to people was sometimes he would ask a question, sometimes he would make a point, sometimes he would rebuke, sometimes he would use mocking, sarcastic, hyperbolic language. And you just need to know sometimes it's hard to know when. So you're going to make mistakes in doing this, and that's okay, but be dependent upon the Lord, trust in the Holy Spirit, and be praying all the time that the Lord gives you the right understanding of the situation so you know how to engage and what tactics to employ.
Yeah. And when I encounter these crusader types that really aren't after an answer, they just want to make you look bad, I love to call their bluff. It's my favorite tactic now. Just call people's bluff, whether it's whole life versus pro-life or the issue of rape. I will say to people, okay, let's grant that we allow abortion in cases of rape. It's not my position, but let's grant it for the sake of you and me discussing this right now. Will you, if I grant that exception for rape, will you now join me in opposing all other abortions that have nothing to do with rape? Here we go again. 100% of the time, the answer is no. Women have a fundamental right to an abortion. So instead of defending that view, they want to hide behind the rape victim, which, is kind of funny because their position is that abortion should be legal for any reason. And they're trying to make it sound like they can get to that position by merely arguing for it in the case of rape. But saying that all abortion ought to be legal because rape abortions might be necessary is kind of like saying we ought to get rid of all traffic laws, as Frank Beckwith points out, because we might have to run a red light rushing a loved one to the hospital. I mean, this is not a good way to argue, and you can call their bluff on it and see where they really stand on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really well said. Guys, we've got some great questions coming in the chat, so we want to get to those. But before we do, I just want to say to anyone who is enjoying this stream, if you feel like you are learning from it, if you feel like your questions are being answered, think of one person that you can share this link with, that you can send it to, who you think may benefit from this, who might have questions to ask, especially somebody who's on the fence, somebody who you think may want to ask a question. Send them the link right now. Invite them to this live stream so that we can help more people to consider the reasonableness of the pro-life position. We've got a great question here from Anelia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You said, I've been wrestling with this one. How do you feel about women being criminalized? There's a segment in the movement that feel like the only way abortion will end is if it will be criminalized. And this, I think, speaks to a kind of a larger question of, should we just be on the ground, just trying to talk to our friends, talk to people, just trying to change minds that way? Or what is the role of law in the pro-life movement and in the pro-life position?
Well, our ultimate goal, our ultimate victory is we protect all unborn humans in law, and we don't win until that day comes. So there is a relationship between law and persuasion. This is a great question. And Mike and Megan, I'd love to hear your thoughts before I get too wordy here. And just what do you think about how we should approach consequences for women who have abortions despite the law saying they can't? Because I think that's what the questioner is getting at here.
Yeah, well, good. Our country really does have pretty good laws, and that's one of the blessings of living in the United States. And not all laws, of course, are perfect. There's some superfluous laws, but generally speaking, especially if you have any knowledge of law around the world, our laws are pretty good, and we have a process to improve and refine laws when we find that they're out of line. And one of the things of good laws is that if there is a punishment for a crime, it's proportional to the crime committed. So this question, actually, you have to be pretty specific, because about women being criminalized, well, to what degree? Because there's some people out there that would say that these women are guilty of murder and must be charged with murder. which I don't know if, Scott, you tell me, Frank, I don't really know of any serious pro-life advocates that are advocating for that because of things like
Oh,
mens
there
rea.
are, believe it or not, there are abolitionists right now that are leading and actually cheering the fact that they are introducing bills that can punish women for murder. Now, there are some thoughtful people on this. I don't want to paint too broadly, but there are some people that are just giddy over the prospect of being able to prosecute women for murder. And my response, go ahead,
Yeah,
Mike.
go for it. No, go for it.
Well, my response is this. What's wrong with a law that says you can't intentionally kill an innocent human being? And if you do, there will be consequences. There should be consequences. But here's the thing. As to what those consequences will be is going to turn on a number of factors that are written into the way we currently do law in the United States, and you can't go with a one-size-fits-all. For example, if you want to prosecute a woman for murder the same way you prosecute the abortion doctor for murder, you're going to have to cross a threshold known as the meeting of the minds. And what that means is you're going to have to prove that woman's knowledge of the act exactly matches the knowledge of the doctor who performed the procedure. We know right away that's not true. I've got just a few feet from me over here on the shelf Dr. Warren Hearn's book, Abortion Practice. He's America's leading abortionist. He's written a medical textbook that I have that teaches you how to dismember unborn humans in the womb. If you want some light reading at night, I'll loan it to you. But this book, he says in there that when you do these abortion procedures, use a Doppler to measure fetal heartbeat, but don't let the mother hear the Doppler. He also advocates ultrasonography use to help target the child, to target the limbs so they can be dismembered more easily. And that is to be turned away from the woman and toward the operator. In other words, she doesn't know exactly what he knows. And that means if you're going to go into a situation where you want to try her as a co-conspirator to an act to abort, your case against her is going to fall apart right away. And by the way, that means the case against him is going to fall apart as well. And typically what pro-life lawmakers have proposed is treating the doctor differently than the woman because you can't get past that meeting of the minds threshold. But I think there's more we could say here about this. And that is, you would also want the woman's testimony. You would want that against the doctor. You're not going to get that if you're going to slap her with the same murder charge you're going to put on the doctor. And then I think there's, as you said, Mike, there's a principle of proportionality here and fairness. We've had 50 years of our culture being told incessantly that abortion is not only legal, not only a constitutional right, but it's a positive good. And now we're going to turn around and just prosecute women for murder after there's been no cultural reinforcement for them to think any differently than they do about it. And I don't buy the notion that every aborting woman knows exactly what she's doing.
Right.
We have to define what we mean by no. And I could see this. What I would argue, my position would be this. Let's have prosecution. Yes. Let's give the law some teeth. But here's where my position would land. Let's prosecute them for conspiracy to commit an illegal act. At least now let's do that. And then we can, in a gradient way, increase the penalties as the culture becomes more exposed to the truth of the pro-life view. And that, I think, would resonate better than leading with this idea we just can't wait to prosecute women for murder.
And let me just jump in here and say, I think you're touching on something very, very interesting, unrelated to the question of law, but simply that the idea that we do not view women who have had abortion as murderers. We view many of them as deceived, as being told lies. They're told, "Oh, you don't have a baby, you have a pregnancy.
Yeah,
you don't have a living human being in you. You have a potential human being in you." And women believe these things, and they believe what they're told, and some of them are very ignorant as to what actually occurs in an abortion. They don't know about the dismemberment. They don't know about these incredibly painful procedures. And so
there
what we
is
would say is,
you're right,
Yeah.
Matt. There is a meeting of the minds in that the woman and the abortionist agree to have the procedure, but that's after that it all breaks down. And then here's another question. How many DAs and juries are going to convict in this country after 50 years of telling women that abortion's a good thing. You're going to be hard pressed to find a DA or a jury anywhere that's going to prosecute a woman for murder here. So we end up with unenforceable laws that really don't apply to the real world situation that's in front of us.
So I think, is it fair, like in a summary statement, to say, or to summarize this idea, this question, the notion of abortion being illegal and thus women who participate in it being a criminal in a sense isn't out of the question. The question remains, what kind of law,
Yes.
what is the penalty? And for where you're, I think that, yeah, you're right. Though there are those extremists.
One last thought on this, Mike. We don't have a problem.
How many times are you going to cut me off, Scott? Come on,
as
man.
often as I can.
I thought we were better friends than this.
Well, I'm just waiting for wisdom to show its face. No, seriously. I would say this last thing about this, and then I'll shut up for a while. It's not only that we have a meeting of the minds problem. It's not only that there's DAs that won't prosecute and other things that go on here. We've got an issue with people in passing laws that could actually hurt saving babies. We couldn't even get a law passed in Montana that said we'll protect children who survive abortion procedures. And now we want to lead with legislation that allows them to be prosecuted for murder. The culture already believes that pro-lifers hate women and want them to die. And now we're going to lead with this. Well, this kind of legislation is going to cause wimpy, skittish pro-life lawmakers who don't have a spine to go nowhere near pro-life bills because they don't want to be attached to anything like this. And what we ought to do instead is pass a bill that says all unborn humans are protected from conception. They all have a right to life, and killing them is wrong. Let's punish the doctors. We do this with drugs all the time. We don't punish the pot smoker the same way we punish the dealer. We treat it differently. We go after the source, the supply. And I think that there's wisdom in that here, and it's not a violation of our Christian ethic to see it that way in the real world.
Yeah. So the action step to take away from this is understanding that this is not an either or battle when it comes to legality and or convincing your friends and neighbors. It is a both and. One, because the law is a teacher. And when laws begin to change, the culture begins to change with it. We've seen that go in both directions with regard to this issue and other issues.
Yep.
But it also means that equipping yourself to speak intelligibly and convincingly and empathetically on this issue to your friends and neighbors is the utmost of importance now more than ever. Roe overturning didn't make it go away. And
That's
so
correct.
We need both.
Good. Let me, before I jump to the next question in the comments here, let me jump in with a question, because I know a lot of people who may be watching this stream either know someone who has had an abortion or they themselves have had an abortion. What would you say to somebody who is watching this stream and has had an abortion and maybe feels guilty for it, or feels like maybe they made the wrong decision? How would you address that person?
Well, I would say that as a follower of Jesus Christ, all of us stand on the same ground before a holy God. We've all sinned and fallen short. And what we all need is an exchange of Christ's righteousness for our own, and he gives it freely to all who ask. So I would say to that person, there's no reason to live in guilt or shame, but to bring this sin into the light, confess it to a loving and merciful God, and then invite other people into your life to bring support. I think the church gets a bad rap in many ways. There's a lot of loving people in church walls and would be ready to go through the hardest things in life with you, and not to shun you or to shame you, but to wrap their arms around you, to walk alongside you in this journey. So I would say to be bold and brave, to let someone know what's gone on, to ask the Lord for forgiveness, and let other people love you through. Let other people love you through it.
Yeah. I would say that one of the common things that no matter where someone stands when it comes to the issue, one of the things that all of us have in common is the understanding that abortion causes pain. that's the one thing that is inescapable when talking about this issue in front of audiences, is knowing that this hurts. And it hurts to talk about, it hurts to hear, but it must be talked about. Scott, you taught me and all of us to understand that when we don't talk about the issue, we're not sparing you pain. Chances are, if you've had an abortion or know someone who has, and you were part of that decision-making process, you're already in pain. As close friends of mine would tell you, and we've talked it out, with them. But what we would spare you by not talking about it is healing. And we talk about it through the only lens we know, which is the fact that the gospel that Mike just so beautifully presented is a truer and realer and closer sense of healing and way of healing than anything else there is. So that's why I think the pro-life view has its place in the larger Christian worldview that houses it and says that we worship a Savior who defeated death and sin, which means that abortion is not some unforgivable, unreproachable thing that makes you an outcast. You are not alone.
Which is why pastors, if any are listening, need to speak on this issue. It's not an out there issue. It's within our walls issue. Every time I speak on abortion, I have someone come up to me and say, "Hey, I've never told anybody this." Yeah. And when the church does not speak on this, they cause people to think that their sin is unforgivable and it's too messy. It's to just keep your business to yourself. And consequently, there's a number of people in our churches that feel isolated, shunned. I can't let anybody really know who I am, and I cannot tell them about my past. I have to bury that. So pastors, you need to invite people to talk about this by you talking about it. And when you do, in a gospel-centered way, you open up the door for other people to talk about it and find a ton of freedom therein.
Amen.
Mike, you're going to love this comment from EJ. She says, "Hi, Scott."
Hang on, real quick. I got to make an important point. Hang on, Scott. Let me make a really.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Go for it. You're going to love this. Hi, Scott and Megan. Thanks for doing this. Looking forward to hearing from Mike and Matthew, too. In other words, shut up.
If you guys can't tell, these guys are really good friends. They love each other.
Maybe not after tonight. We'll see about that.
That's great. That's great. We've got a great question here from Jeremy. He says, today was the Indiana March for Life. What would you put on a billboard to most effectively reach abortion-minded women and the apathetic, mushy middle? Billboard-sized argument.
Well, I'll just tell you my first, thought, and maybe there's a better thought. I don't know that there is one. I don't know. I see a lot of bad billboards that just make me hate what their cause, because it's just hard to communicate something profound and meaningful that way. So that's my first thought. I don't know that there is one. I don't know if Scott, Megan, or anybody else has a better idea, or anybody in the chat. Maybe someone watching this has got a good idea. There is not anything that comes immediately to my mind, though.
Yeah, I mean, I like the pro-life syllogism. I think more people need to think about pro-life that way. But this idea of it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. The unborn is an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. And I think people get so wrapped up, like you're saying, Scott, in all of these other issues. They get wrapped up in, when do brainwaves start? When does pain start? When does a heartbeat start? And these sorts of questions. And the most important question is, what is the unborn? And if it's wrong to kill an innocent being and the unborn is a human being, then it's wrong. Abortion is wrong. So I think that if I was forced to, I agree with what you're saying, Mike. I don't find many people's minds are changed that I've heard about through billboards. But if we were going to put something up there, I think that's what I would want to put.
I might draw a distinction between billboards on a highway and large signs displayed, for example, on a college campus somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
I would draw that distinction. And I think we do need to show the abortion victim imagery. I think Greg Cunningham has a great quote. He says, when you show pictures of abortion, abortion protests itself. And this is important as we get more and more people who just seem to be totally apathetic. They just say, I don't care. And we're going to have to bypass that and speak directly to their moral intuitions, and pictures properly used can do that.
Yeah. We got a good suggestion here, maybe just to pick a Scott's book on the billboard. We could put that up there, and that would change some people's minds. I agree with that. Echo.
Did you see who said that? That was my wife, by the way.
That was your wife. I like that. That was great. Echo has a good suggestion here of the free ultrasounds, and that the studies do show that when women view ultrasounds, they are much more likely to keep their baby because, as you pointed out earlier, Scott, so many pro-abortion advocates want to keep women uninformed. They don't want them to understand the reality of what they're carrying in their womb.
Yes.
And what we want to do, which is wild because they claim to be pro-choice. They claim to be pro-choice, and yet at the same time, they want to keep women uninformed about the truth of the reality. And as a pro-life advocate, I want to say, no. I want you to know what it is that you are carrying and to have as much information as possible. And that's why, many states have tried to pass various laws requiring women to view an ultrasound before they choose to have an abortion. And I think that's a powerful argument as well.
Yeah, I met a nurse recently in Texas at a conference where I was speaking, and she is a nurse in a pregnancy resource center who gets to be in that room. She calls it those magic moments of showing the ultrasound image. And she was telling me just in the 2 or 3 days prior to the conference that she'd had 3 mothers on the table change their minds because of the ultrasound. Yeah.
That's great.
Makes a difference.
We've got a question here from Taylor Michael. He says, hey team, how to respond if someone admits that it is a human, but simply doesn't care? This is so baffling to me that I'm left speechless.
Yeah, well, that's where the sophisticated arguments really are, right? It's that they are human. And so partly the question is, how do you respond? One of the ask questions, again, this setting may be different because you may be like on a debate stage, but that's not most of us. I would ask a lot of questions and not assume the burden of proof. That's a lot of mistakes that a lot of us make, is that as soon as someone raises an objection, we feel like we have to go into presentation mode and we have to give our lecture and lay out our arguments. But in most settings, what you can just do is respond to a question. You can ask, you can respond back and say something. Okay, so you agree that it's a human, but it doesn't bother you. What is it? Why is that? What do you think makes human life valuable? And then just listen, ask more questions, and find out what really the root of the issue is, where this person is coming from. And then your knowledge is really relevant because you've honed in a little bit more on what is really motivating this person in their position, rather than just treating their question like it came out of a textbook and you giving your textbook response. Yeah. So just learning how to ask really good questions. What do you mean by that? Can you define that word? You keep using that word. What do you mean by that? Have you considered the consequences of your belief? These classic tactic questions that were in Greg Kokel's book. But from a response standpoint, just learning how to ask a lot of good questions and then follow-up questions to gain a better understanding of the position somebody's coming from is a really good approach in many settings, not just dealing with abortion.
Yeah, Mike, I love that you're pastoral in that way. Because I was thinking the same kind of thing. I'd want to know, where's this person coming from? Yeah. Why such apathy? And so I'd have the same response. And I just probably we can share. Well, we've shared these experiences with when we encountered people who think this way. I would say that in my experience, most of the time, it's either that they haven't really thought through the position well, or something happened that they've not quite dealt with at an emotional level.
Yeah.
Great. We've got a question here, or actually a suggestion again on the billboard that I wanted to bring up. But before I do that, we had a question from Carla that says, is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, it's being recorded. And you can watch this and send it to friends after it's done on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, on our Twitter accounts, everywhere. It's being streamed. You can send this out afterwards so that people can enjoy this conversation. On the billboard, we have a suggestion here. I don't like most billboards or bumper stickers, but I like the silhouette of the pregnant woman that says "Love them both." A lot of people get stuck on pro-lifers only caring about the baby. Now, I wanted to get your take on this, Scott, because I think this does. I like the idea of loving them both, and I do think we should love them both. But does this sort of get back to the question of the pro-life movement becoming more than what it ought to be, or is this maybe right in the realm of what we ought to be advocating for as pro-lifers?
It's still in our sweet spot, and here's why. Notice that loving both the mother and the child relates directly to the question of abortion, where when you ask pro-lifers to take on immigration reform, refugee care, educational reform, inner city poverty, there are not the same direct links. But within the pro-life movement, there is room for a variety of ministry focuses. Some will be on the mother, helping her navigate this pregnancy that she finds untimely and unwanted. Others will be about the apologetics approach, convincing people that the biblical worldview on human value is more persuasive than alternative explanations. There's room for variance, provided everything is pointed toward the question of how should we think morally about abortion, and loving mothers and their children fits within that. So I don't have a problem with that. I'm not against pregnancy centers.
I like this. Nice. Who asked that question? Good job crowdsourcing it. This, I if I were driving down the highway and I saw that, I would go, yes. Nice. Yep. Nice work. Yeah, that's a good one.
And I think that speaks again to the work that so many pro-lifers do to support young women, to support young mothers. They don't view it as a unrelated thing to the life of the unborn. It's like, no, those two are interrelated. We don't just care about babies being born. We care about women, those mothers being supported as well. So
it's interesting because the cultural narrative would say otherwise, and that's what most people hear. So it doesn't matter the group, that any group I'm speaking to, just to begin to talk about some of the work that pregnancy resource centers do for mothers, not only leading up to birth of the child, but also years into that child's early life for both child and mother, in terms of providing resources and classes and support. People are shocked to hear they just didn't know. They had no idea that these places existed in their communities and that they outnumber abortion providers the way that they do.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not pro-lifers who don't care about kids once they're born. It's pro-abortion Democrats who don't care about them, because every one of them in the Senate or anywhere else in the country will vote to deny protection for children who survive abortion procedures. They directly don't care about children once they're born, where pro-lifers do, in fact, have a lot of ministry to people after they're born. We keep at it.
It's a very, very good point.
Hey, nice work there, EJ. Nice work, man. Thanks for chiming in on that.
We got a great example of this too with Anelia. She says she works for a national pro-life nonprofit, and our slogan is "We rescue children through caring for moms." It graciously expresses both our love for both baby and mom. So I love that. Very good. We've had several questions come in on the question of the life of the mother, and so I'd love to ask this question too. One of the questions was worded this way: what do you say to a married couple of 4 who just found out that they are pregnant, but sadly learns that the baby poses significant health risks, even death to the mother? Is abortion justified to save the mother? How would you handle that one?
Yeah, well, it's all about, and this is where the syllogism is so important, right? Because the syllogism says that it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. So intent here is really important. So in the case of something like an ectopic pregnancy, where you're either both mom and child are going to die, or you can save the mother, but the foreseen and unwanted consequence will be the death of the child. But there is no other option. There's no way to save the child. The intent in that action is to save the mother's life. The intent is not the killing of an innocent human being, though it is a foreseen and unwanted consequence. Yeah. So you would be morally justified in saving the mother's life there. And technically speaking, then it would not be an abortion.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's well
Intent
said.
is the word that matters. Yeah, we get asked that question all the time, and it's a fair question. And it's who are you able to save? So Mike was putting there, you're going to lose two for sure if you don't act. So doing the greater moral good is to act to save who you can when you cannot save them all. And so these medical conditions like this typically fall under that. It goes one of two ways as far as beforehand. This is a conversation that, because we work with so many young adults who are of dating and marriage age, these are conversations that they need to have. Oftentimes the mother will expressly say, if it comes down to it, this is who I want you to save. When that's not the case, typically the physician will save the life of the mother, but the reasons there are circumstantial reasons. They have nothing to do, they don't detract from the pro-life case that's been built. They have no bearing on the humanity or the intrinsic value of the life that was lost. So in these horrific cases, in the broken world that we live in, that really do happen, we call those tragedies. It's not the same as abortion, and it's not fair for it to be used as a fear tactic from those who are arguing for abortion rights.
Remember, with abortion, we not only foresee the death of the unborn, we intend it. Where with ectopic pregnancy treatment, we foresee, as Mike said, the death of the embryo, but we don't intend it.
And this is... Oh, go ahead.
But, well, what I was going to ask was, so what do you... I've had friends too who, when they were pregnant, the doctor said your child will not survive, but for hours after birth, and the doctors were not wrong about that. Yeah. How do you guys address that situation for people when it comes to abortion?
Megan, you want first shot at that?
Well, if I'm doing the strict intellectual, how would I think about that well, which I think would serve this audience well? I hope it would, because I'm not denying or forgetting about the emotional blow there. I too might have friends who've walked that road. I would say that if I had a 2-year-old that I knew would die within minutes or hours, could I take my 2-year-old's life right now just to ease my own suffering? And the answer to that is no, I cannot do that. That would be morally wrong. If the unborn is human, like the 2-year-old is human, then I cannot do that for the unborn either. I think it probably bolsters it to say that if you speak to someone who has walked through that and chosen to bring their child into the world and hold that child and has the ability to say goodbye, like my friend Joanna, she would tell you that she would not trade. For her, it was 7 days. She would not trade those 7 days with Liam for anything in the world. She got to hold him, and she will tell you, I handed him to my Lord and Savior to keep until I could see him again. Statistically speaking, the mothers who are allowed to do that have better emotional and mental outcomes than those who do not. Now, that's just a statistic, so it can't cover every story, but it holds to be true.
I think there's a moral principle here that simply goes like this. Why do those of us who are going to live longer have a right to intentionally kill those who will live shorter? Soldiers that are mortally wounded on a battlefield are going to die very soon, but we don't slit their throats. We make them as comfortable as possible until they die naturally from their injuries. And the same would apply here, whether we're talking about an anencephalic baby or other disabilities that might cause the child to lose its life very soon after birth. We provide the best medical care we can. And I think that's the principle. We will always care, never harm. That's a good bioethical principle that I wish our elites would recover in this country.
It's the Hippocratic Oath that doesn't seem to apply to anybody anymore.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, there are so many cases where the doctors do say, look, this baby's not going to make it. And yet they do, and they go on to live normal, healthy lives. And so it's, to take a life on a false assumption is a terrible thing to do. Because we truly don't know the future. And, even in cases that seem like, oh, this baby won't survive, sometimes the doctors are wrong, and they outlive even their wildest expectations.
Yep.
On the question of the life of the mother, I think it's important to make two more points too. One is that these cases where the life of the mother is truly at risk, I've heard those are very rare. And what's much more common is that abortions are justified based on the health of the mother, and the health of the mother is meant to include anything from mental health to financial health to all sorts of things. And that's been abused in our legal system up to the current day to say, yes, a woman can get an abortion for her health, and yet health can mean just about anything that you want it to mean.
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, there's empirical evidence to back up what you just said, Matthew. Dr. Thomas Murphy Goodwin, who for years ran the largest high-risk pregnancy clinic in the world, he was seeing between 15 and 16,000 women a year who were told by primary care physicians, you must abort or you will die. And he said of that number, only 1 to 2% required terminating the pregnancy to save the mother's life. What he said was much more common is that primary care physicians were worried about being sued for wrongful birth, so they recommended termination to protect their own butts, basically. Wow. And Thomas Murphy Goodwin called him out on this. In fact, he's in his article at First Things, which if you go to firstthings.org and type medicalizing abortion decisions in the search box, you can get his article. What he said is that he has given women high, heavy doses of chemotherapy who were suffering from cancer, and the fetus will tolerate that treatment if the physician knows what he's doing, and that a lot of physicians are quite frankly just lazy. They don't want to do the work of treating both as patients, and so they punt to termination.
Yeah, that's very, very tragic. I think we've got time for maybe one more question, and this was one that was texted to me, and I'd love for maybe each of us to just spend a moment or two answering this question, because I think it's very, very relevant, and just that, what would you say to somebody who is on the fence about abortion? Maybe they have considered some of these pro-life arguments, they see some of the logic of it, and yet they feel compassion towards women who are in difficult situations. What would you say to somebody who is on the fence?
Yeah, well, this probably sounds like something I've already said, but you're not alone, and me and my wife are here for you. I mean, you know, my wife and I and our friends, we put our money where our mouth is. We've had friends in hard case situations before where we put our money on the line. We put our family's schedule on the line for them. And that's what it is to be a follower of Jesus Christ. We love sacrificially because that's how we've been loved. So if somebody is on the fence, my guess is they're on the fence because they're inclined to think that it's wrong, but they feel they have no choice. And what we would say to them is, me, my family, and my church, we've got your back. So let us help you.
Great.
I think I would start with saying that, and again, I don't know who I'm talking to, right? So it's going to matter. I think there has to be that connection, that relational component. We're fellow human beings. But in general, for somebody like that, I'd want to be able to make the case that what we feel about a thing does not determine what it is. That does not discount our feelings as part of our humanity, as part of our human experience, or as vital indicators of things that are going on. We need to pay attention to our feelings. But we also need to pay attention to what is true and good. And I would say the second thing I would want to bring home would be asking the question, more or less, the biblical version is, who is my neighbor? Given all that's been presented, if I want to truly be compassionate and love another, then I have to see love as something more than mere feelings of affection, which is what our culture's kind of reduced it or diffused it to be. Love, I'll borrow from my favorite definition, which comes from Aquinas, but Jay Budziszewski words it this way. He says, love is the enduring commitment of the will to the true good of the other person. If I have somebody who's on the fence about abortion, who's looking around them and seeing mothers who are walking through incredibly hard situations, because if they are pregnant, then they are indeed mothers based on the evidence presented, The true good of the other person is going to be, how can I walk alongside this mother such that this other human life, who is another other, has every chance of flourishing along with their mother. And whatever it takes to do that sacrificially, as Mike pointed out, I hope that we are willing to do that. So I think that's where it starts. We were not called to easy, but that's the real world that we live in. And sometimes that gut level honesty is the thing that we need to hear from someone else.
Yep. Well, I can't add much to what Mike and Megan have just said. If I were talking to someone facing an abortion decision, I would absolutely go the way Mike just mentioned. I think that's exactly right. By the way, just so our listeners know, there's nothing wrong if you encounter someone that's facing a crisis pregnancy and you're not quite sure what to do, to refer them and go with them to a local pregnancy center where there is staff trained to help that woman think through this decision. Don't think you have to be the superhero that handles every situation. Quite frankly, that's out of my league as an apologist. I'm going to get resources involved that are better equipped, and that doesn't mean I'm a failure. It just means, as my favorite philosopher Clint Eastwood likes to say, a man has got to know his limitations. If I were talking to somebody who isn't facing a pregnancy-related decision and they're just on the fence on abortion, I like asking questions. I think that's a great, unassuming way to get started. So I'll ask questions like, so tell me, do you think each and every human being has an equal right to life? And of course, everybody in today's egalitarian culture doesn't want to say no. They all want to say yes. And then when they say yes, I say, well, if I can demonstrate the unborn are members of the human family, would you agree that they too deserve the same protections as you and I? And of course, then the excuses start. They're too small. They're underdeveloped. And then again, I go into question mode. I'll say, if it's wrong to hurt people because of skin color or gender, why is it okay to hurt them because of their size, their level of development, their environment, or their degree of dependency? And just give them questions to think about. As Greg Koukl likes to say, put that pebble in their shoe. Give them something that's going to wear on them until they resolve it. And I think there's a tendency out there to think we fail as apologists if we don't close the deal on the spot. And I'll just tell you, as one who's been married for 38 years, arguments are seldom won on the spot. They're usually won a couple of weeks later when you're alone with your thoughts and you admit your spouse had the better argument. And we shouldn't expect anything different from the people we're talking to. Our job is to give them something to think about and position this in a way that they can't just dismiss it. It kind of wears on them. And maybe it's 2 weeks later, as they're in the drive-through at Starbucks, they'll finally admit you had a good point. And that's when you've won the exchange, not because you got the person to fall to their knees and say, thank you for straightening out my twisted thinking.
Yep.
And I think that's a really good point too, Scott, that you might even offend your friend when you bring up this topic and when you disagree with them about it. And yet sometimes it takes offending a friend. Sometimes it takes having them be mad at you for them to then change their mind. My dad talks about how when he was a lapsed Christian, it took somebody calling him a hypocrite to his face for him to recommit his life to the Lord, come back to the Lord. And you better believe he was mad in the moment. But several days later, he had to reconsider what somebody said to him, and it was ringing in his ears. And we are so terrified in our culture of offending somebody else. It's like the unviolatable principle that thou shalt not offend, and that we just have to be ready to say, you know what, lives matter more than that. And if my friend is considering an abortion, I owe it to their unborn child to speak for them, to someone who can't speak for themselves. And to give it my best shot to talk to my friend, to have a conversation with them, to recommend an incredible resource, to say, hey, if you've never actually considered this case in full, why don't you just take some time? I'll read it with you. I'll sit down with you, and we can ask these questions together. Because if you're wrong about this, the consequences are dire. If you're wrong about this, then there really is a human life that's at stake here. So Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight for this conversation. Thank you for everyone who has been putting your questions in the chat and asking your honest questions. Again, if you enjoyed this conversation, it's going to be uploaded, so you can send the link to others to uh, enjoy what we have talked about tonight. Do any of you guys have any closing comments or things that you'd like to say
Yeah,
for
I've
us?
got to apologize to my wife. Apparently, my hat was on crooked for this entire thing. And she texted me, and I didn't get it till later. And she said, "Your hat is crooked, and it's driving me crazy. It's not what the cool kids are doing." So I'm sorry, Terry-Anna, for embarrassing you in front of the world tonight.
That's why I
I'll check.
interrupted you so much, Mike, to get the attention off you.
Yes, that's so kind of you, Scott. Yes, thank you for doing that. All right, have a great night, everybody. God bless.